All right, let's get more analysis from Ronald Grigor Suny. He is a professor of history and political science at the University of Michigan and joins me from Ann Arbor in Michigan. I'm wondering about these sanctions that are targeting Russia. Have they made any difference so far? And also these oligarchs in particular who are being targeted. Do you think that they have much influence over Putin?
Sanctions, like cyber warfare, are ways of putting pressure on a state short of war. So they're good things. I mean, along with diplomacy, there are a variety of ways you can prevent war. They haven't worked right now. That is, we have a war. Putin, without provocation, attacked Ukraine, and we're seeing the destruction on the TV every minute. Oligarchs are not happy with what's going on. A number of them have sold assets. They've actually publicly come out. But, Putin is powerful. He tamed the oligarchs, essentially, at the beginning of his time in office. And they haven't really resisted in the past. There was a kind of deal made. You can make money. You can keep your money. Just stay out of politics. And so they obeyed that. Those who didn't went to jail or went into exile or even faced worse fates. But now there's real discontent in Russia. You see the demonstrations and you see important figures, public figures, some pundits, even some retired generals and some oligarchs complaining about what's going on.
And surely Putin has prepared for sanctions from the West. I mean, whatever you think of him, he certainly is not a dumb man. But I'm wondering, what else does the West have in its arsenal to try to compel him to pull back in his attacks on Ukraine, short of actually sending in soldiers?
You can negotiate. That is, Ukrainians and Russians are negotiating. But negotiations have to be give and take. They have to be concessions made, and that's very difficult at the moment. Under the gun, with a war in progress, how do you go now? How do you make those kinds of concessions? Zelensky is now a major world figure, a brave defender of his homeland, but he could lose that status should he make concessions and compromises that might tamper with Ukrainian sovereignty. And some of the demands of the Russians may indeed be very extreme, like recognize Crimea, which was part of Ukraine, or the Donbas areas. And so we've lost the kind of give and take, the flexibility that we would have had before the war started. This is a very difficult situation.
I'm wondering if this is strengthening another alliance against the West, as we see Russia being more and more cut off from Western countries through sanctions and also these companies, pulling out of Russia. I mean, for example, is it bringing Russia and China closer together?
Oh, it seems to be so. There are two ways you can look at this conflict. And one way is that it's not so much about Russia and Ukraine. It's about that, of course. But it's also about a conflict between Russia and the West. And that is the United States particularly. The United States has ambitions and sees itself as a global power, as a global hegemon with interests in all parts of the world. And Russia wants to sort of have its place in the sun. It wants to be an important regional hegemon. In some ways, like Turkey wants to be a regional hegemon in the Middle East. And the United States doesn't like that. It doesn't want those kinds of competitive hegemons. And so we've got a conflict. And the United States, another thing that happens is the West often says, we don't want Russia to have any spheres of influence. And yet the United States has a sphere of influence in Latin America, the Monroe Doctrine, and in some ways has a mammoth 30-nation member armed sphere of influence, namely the NATO alliance. And so there's a real conflict between the visions of the world, some that would favor the West. And Putin, when he sees this, he imagines this is a real threat to himself. And based on his own understanding of the threat, which in no sense was immediate, without provocation, he launched this devastating war.
All right, some really great analysis there. Professor Ronald Grigor Suny joining us from Ann Arbor. Thank you.